Guys, I'm really struggling with these folks who have prominent platforms online who keep speaking authoritatively about things that they genuinely know nothing about, but it's even more mind-boggling when they denigrate a thing while simultaneously recognizing the success of it without even knowing. My name is Brittany Page, and this is the Page Perspective. It's a new year, and like any other year, there will be good and bad, and we don't know what's in store, but I'm looking forward to being here with you, and I'd really appreciate it if you would take just a moment to click subscribe. The button is below. If you haven't done it already, it's free, and it helps me in my battle against the YouTube algorithm so that more people can see what I'm putting out, but also it helps me get to my goal of 100,000 subscribers. Place your bets in the comments below for when you think I'll reach my goal and help me get there. Thank you so much. So I did a video about Cenk Uygur and Ana Kasparian over at the Young Turks in November of 2023. This was the first time their very misguided takes on homelessness came across my radar. Since then, Ana has identified herself as unaligned politically, and Cenk has been making the rounds, appearing with people like Charlie Kirk on stage at right-wing events, all while maintaining the slogan that TYT is the home of the progressives. But we have more disinformation here, and it's a problem because not only are we fighting a well-funded right-wing media machine that misinforms the public about the causes and solutions of poverty, we have media figures who say that they're on the left, contributing to the spread of misinformation as well. So I'm going to break down a few moments in this new segment that Cenk and Ana did on homelessness. But first, to give you some context, in this segment, they are discussing the new report from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the 2024 Annual Homelessness Assessment Report to Congress. This report dominated headlines because, well, it's devastating. The key findings show us that the number of people experiencing homelessness on a single night in 2024 was the highest ever recorded. Reading from the report, a total of 771,480 people, or about 23 of every 10,000 people in the United States, experienced homelessness in an emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing program, or in unsheltered locations across the country. People and families with children had the largest single-year increase in homelessness. Between 2023 and 2024, 39% more people and families with children experienced homelessness. Overall, the numbers of people experiencing homelessness increased by 18%. That 18% increase is on top of the 12% increase we saw in January 2023. You may have heard of the point-in-time count. That's how we get these numbers. On a single night in January, there's an effort across the nation to count the number of people who are homeless. And as we can see, we have the highest number ever recorded. And I'm not going to get into this aspect of it, but many people were not actually counted. And I'll flash up this headline and I'll add it to my sources in the description of the video so you can read it yourself. But I am briefly highlighting this so you know that this does not include everyone who is homeless. The number is likely higher. But what does this report say about the reasons for this increase? Well, the report cites several factors, with the main factor, of course, being the housing affordability crisis, rising inflation, stagnating wages, and the, quote, persisting effects of systemic racism. They also cite natural disasters and the rising number of people immigrating to the United States, as well as the expiration of essential support programs put into place during the pandemic. Many people have led with the migrant crisis as the main factor here, and I would treat any person who does that with skepticism. While immigration certainly factors into increases in places like New York City, Chicago, Denver, there are several states that saw record levels of homelessness that were not impacted by an influx of migrants. States like Idaho or Kansas, for example. So Cenk and Ana begin their segment talking about this report and focusing really on the immigration aspect. And then they pivot to a discussion on other factors that contribute to homelessness. And they They hone in on what they believe are the missteps in attempts to address the homelessness crisis, specifically a reliance on the housing first model. And let's just start there. We'll be addressing both Ana and Cenk today, but we will start with Ana. Watch this.
I think the failure of the housing first policy is that it pursues a one size fits all approach to this issue. And this isn't a simple issue. This is actually a much more complex issue. We do need to build more housing. There's no question about that. But there are people who are struggling on the streets with severe addiction or severe mental health issues. So if you are someone who has a severe mental health condition, right? Let's say paranoid schizophrenia or something like that, you haven't been getting the medical care you need. Just taking you and putting you in a apartment unit is not going to solve the problem.
Ana, truly, how are you still saying this? Taking someone who is ill and putting them in an apartment, and that's it, that is not housing first. Listen to the phrase that you are using. Housing first. It is not housing only. This is so irresponsible of you, and you've had so much time to learn about the model that you continue to denigrate, and yet here you are, still misrepresenting it in the most ignorant and cringeworthy fashion. In my video from November of 2023, I do a deep dive on housing first and Sam Simbaris, the creator of the model. So you can watch that if you want the deep dive. But briefly, housing first was created as a response to what is called housing readiness. And that's just what it sounds like. It's a model where you have to prove that you are ready for housing before getting it. This would look like someone struggling with severe mental illness or addiction having to prove medication or treatment compliance. So they're going to their appointments, they're taking their medication, they have to prove that first, or having to meet sobriety conditions. So they have to be sober first prior to receiving housing assistance. Housing readiness is what many people think is right because we've been trained to look at people who are struggling and ask them to prove to us that they're one of the good ones. They're one of the ones worthy of help. Housing First came along and said, wait, how are people supposed to demonstrate medication or treatment compliance or adherence to sobriety conditions while still enduring the instability of not having a stable and safe place to live, wondering where they will get their next meal? Wouldn't it make more sense to first ensure that the basic need of shelter is met, while at the same time providing wraparound services to assist with mental health conditions or addiction issues? Mental health conditions and addiction issues are not ignored in a housing first model. In fact, housing first exists to make it easier to address those very issues. It's just that you don't have to go through this phase of proving your worthiness for housing to get it. You exist, so you are worthy of housing. That's housing first. But that doesn't stop Cenk from joining in to say, no, actually, housing first is totally useless.
On housing first, that's a third problem. Because a lot of folks have tried housing first and they go, don't ask if they've got mental health issues or addiction issues, and no, let's just put them into houses first, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. And almost no one has addressed the mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of talk from our side, the left, about, oh, we've got to address that. But no one ever actually does, right? They do the housing first, but they never follow up with the mental health funds. So then, that creates a problem where people don't even stay in the houses. So we can get more
like
of that.
my experience.
They don't ask if they have mental health or addiction issues. Could it be any more obvious that Cenk has never worked with this population? The problem here is that Cenk and Ana take selective examples of fraud or misallocations of funds for homelessness services, and then they generalize that as a widespread problem. They take selective examples of programs not operating as they should and say, look, this is evidence that housing first does not work. Are there programs not operating as they should? Of course. Are there programs engaged in fraud and misallocating funds? Of course, and that's wrong. But we can't generalize specific issues here and there and say, this is why Housing First doesn't work, especially when the two people saying that don't even understand the basics of the model. Why would you point to a program that isn't effectively implementing Housing First to say that Housing First doesn't work? You'd want to first make sure that the program you're evaluating is actually implementing Housing First as it should be implemented, right? Before determining whether or not that model works, right? But what's so weird about his rant is that Cenk actually uses two examples of Housing First working to illustrate that it doesn't work. And he doesn't even know he's doing it. Let's start with his Houston reference.
How do you treat folks? And so we're gonna get into that a little bit. Do you do Housing First, or do you try to get them medical treatment or addiction treatment, et cetera? And I think that overall, there's some cities that have done a wonderful job. Houston got rid of their bureaucracy, mainlined it, and actually got homelessness down by 40% at one point.
So again, framing Housing First as housing or medical treatment, housing or addiction help, rather than housing and medical treatment or housing and addiction help, because that's what it is. But Cenk, you like to present yourself as a reasonable guy, right? Who wants to find common ground. You want to follow the evidence where it leads, right? So I hope that you will correct the record here. You are referencing Houston's success in reducing homelessness while criticizing and misrepresenting Housing First. But Housing First is the reason for the success in Houston. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the people who are on the ground doing the work. The people who are quoted in this CBS News article from April 2024. Quote, "For Houston, it's one more piece of evidence that its strategy for solving its homelessness problem works. Kelly Young, who heads Houston's Coalition for the Homeless, says it's a model that the rest of the nation should look at and follow. Quote, "We were one of the worst in the nation to begin with in 2011, 2012, Young said, and now we're considered one of the best. What happened? In 2012, the city went all in on a concept called Housing First. Since then, homelessness is down 63% in the greater Houston area, and more than 30,000 people have been housed. Quote, "Our natural instinct when we see homelessness increasing is to hire more outreach workers and to build more shelter beds," said Mandy Chapman Semple, the architect of Houston's success story. She now advises other cities on how to replicate it, among them Dallas, New Orleans, and Oklahoma City. Quote, "The idea that if you have no permanent place to live, that you're also going to be able to transform and tackle complex mental health issues, addiction issues, complex financial issues, it's just unrealistic." Exactly. And Cenk is right about a piece of this. He mentioned the cutting of the bureaucracy element. And yes, Houston gathered several disparate organizations and placed them under one umbrella where they work together to solve this problem. But those organizations work together on Housing First. What could it be that has Cenk fully aware of one aspect of this and totally wrong about the rest? Could it be something like, I don't know, motivated reasoning? Is in his dedication to his pre-existing beliefs about Housing First, is that interfering with his ability to onboard new information? I don't know. It happens to the best of us. We're only human. But wait, Cenk references another example of success, and this time we're looking at veterans.
One is we're not directing the money to the right places, and you could tell because with veterans we do.
Yeah.
We actually do a very good job, and the number of veterans that are homeless now have gone down significantly, okay? And that's because there's bipartisan support for that. Not only does it get more funding, but there's more concern about where the funding goes and the fact that it actually goes to help veterans, as opposed to in California, you give money to homelessness and it just disappears into a black hole, right? And never to be seen again, no one ever gets housed, it's just absurd. But it's direct to veterans, it works. Mm-hmm. So the funding can work, but you've got to make sure that it's actually going to the right place. And then finally, On Housing First, that's a third problem.
Housing first is the problem, guys. Veterans, that's where we're really seeing success in reducing homelessness, and it's because of bipartisan support and funding. Cenk, again, please, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs has been successful at reducing veteran homelessness because of Housing First. Let's look at this article from December 2023 from va.gov. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, is committed to ending homelessness among veterans because it is our nation's duty to ensure all veterans have a place to call home. VA's efforts to prevent and end veteran homelessness are built around the evidence-based Housing First approach. Pretty straightforward. Let's look at the HUD press release on the homelessness report from just about a week ago. Quote, through targeted funding and interventions that utilize evidence-based practices, homelessness among veterans dropped to the lowest number on record. There was a nearly 8% decrease from 35,574 in 2023 to 32,882 in 2024. In the number of veterans experiencing homelessness. Among unsheltered veterans, the number dropped to nearly 11% from 15,507 in 2023 to 13,851 in 2024. This year, HUD has helped connect nearly 90,000 veteran households to stable rental homes through the HUD Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program. The Department of Veterans Affairs announced that it has permanently housed 47,925 veterans experiencing homelessness in 2024, marking the largest numbers of veterans housed in a single year since 2019. And back in October, the VA shared the story of Coast Guard veteran Grady Kendall, who used that program, the HUD Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing, a Housing First program. I will link to it in the description so that you can read about it. There is no shortage of information out there about the VA following a Housing First model and that they have been successful doing so. You know, toward the end, they start to talk about compulsory mental health treatment, the need for mandatory mental health treatment for those on the streets. And Ana mentions that some on the left don't like this idea, but it's an important piece of the puzzle. And that's what's so strange about how they continue to talk about this issue without educating themselves. You know, Sam Simbaris, the psychologist who created Housing First, he admits that yes, there are people who need a higher level of care, people who need institutionalization. And while I'm on the left and I have concerns about compulsory mental health treatment being widespread and being abused and possibly capturing people who would be better served in a less restrictive environment, I do recognize, like Sam Simbaris, that of course there are people who need a higher level of care. If you're watching this on a Friday, that means I'm at an inpatient psychiatric hospital working directly with people who are there involuntarily, doing gardening therapy groups. And this is where a lot of my frustration comes in. I would give Cenk and Ana more of a break if this was a one-off situation and then they worked to correct themselves. But they are clearly motivated to represent homelessness a certain way to their audience and ignore the evidence that contradicts their pre-existing worldview. We are facing an uphill battle when it comes to educating people about poverty already. We have a Supreme Court that just gave the green light to cities to criminalize homelessness. We live in a society where when it comes to the cost of resources and support, we struggle to allocate the cash and we ask if it's really necessary or what conditions should be put on it to ensure that someone is worthy. When it comes to punishment, we spare no expense. This is an almost 12-minute segment from the home of the progressives, and housing affordability is barely discussed. Rental assistance, funding for rental assistance, or the need for rent control, that's not discussed at all. They read briefly from a New York Times article summarizing the report, not the actual report. Did they read the report? You have to wonder. Instead, most of this segment is dedicated to attacking a version of Housing First that doesn't exist. It's dedicated to attacking a model that Cenk doesn't even know is responsible for the success of the decreases in homelessness that he's referencing in Houston and for veterans. It's frankly embarrassing, and it's dangerous. A homeless woman was set on fire in New York City. I just did a video about a cop giving a citation to a woman in labor who was living on a mattress under the freeway because she's homeless. This is a crisis. Talk to the people who are doing this work in Houston. Talk to Sam Simbaris. Stop looking for ways to protect your pre-existing views and do better, please. I'd love to know what you all think about this. I have a new voicemail number. It's kind of hard to transition out of that. It got a little heated for a second. Be sure to save this new voicemail number. It's a new year, new number, 202-656-1509. I even struggled to read it. It's so new. Or send an email to idoubtit@dollemore.com. You can support my work by clicking the join button below for as little as $1.99 a month, or by going to patreon.com/idoubtitpodcast. I appreciate you being here. Let's do the best that we can with this new year. Take care, and I will see you next time.